Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling, well, one of the absolute darkest chapters in human history. The Holocaust. 6 million Jewish lives extinguished. It's a number so stark, so devastating, it still chills us. And it forces us, really, to ask that central, incredibly difficult question. Why?
Right.
How could this happen? This systematic, almost industrial-level extermination of an entire people right in the heart of modern Europe. It's something that demands we look really closely at the history.
Absolutely.
So our mission in this deep dive is to try and peel back those layers. It's incredibly complex, deeply disturbing history.
It is.
We want to unpack how all these things came together.
Yeah.
You know, the really deep-rooted historical anti-Semitism, the massive social and economic chaos in 20th century Germany, and then this twisted, dangerous ideology of the Nazi Party.
This confluence of factors.
Exactly. How did they conspire with such, well, terrifying precision to make something truly unimaginable into a horrific reality? We'll look at the specific reasons, the justifications, however baseless, that the Nazis gave for hating Jewish people.
And crucially, how those beliefs turned into policy.
Yes, devastating policies and ultimately systematic genocide.
Yeah.
We want to understand the mechanics, really, how a fabricated enemy became the target for state-sponsored annihilation.
And our insights today, they come directly from a detailed analysis of source material, really focused on the specific question of why and how.
Right.
The aim is to give you a factual, unbiased understanding of how this unfolded, the ideological framework behind it all. By sticking close to that historical record, we can grasp the nuances without, speculating.
And for you, our listener, understanding this history isn't just about looking back, is it?
No, not at all.
It's about equipping ourselves. Learning to recognize, maybe challenge, these dangerous patterns of unchecked hatred, the way conspiracy theories can spread, how prejudice gets weaponized. It happens in different ways in different eras.
Understanding the roots, the progression of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
It's not just academic.
No. It's a vital lesson, really, in how vulnerable societies can be to extreme ideology, understanding how it happened, so we can try, at least, to make sure it never, ever happens again.
Yeah.
In any form.
Exactly.
So let's begin this deep dive. Okay, let's unpack this. Germany after World War I. To put it mildly, it was a powder keg, just simmering with resentment, humiliation, deep economic despair.
An absolute pressure cooker.
Imagine, a nation pouring everything into this massive global war and then suffering a crushing defeat. The sources really emphasize the psychological impact of that loss.
Oh, profoundly.
And then you add the burden of the Treaty of Versailles, those harsh reparations, losing territory. It wasn't just political. It felt like a deep national wound, a betrayal even.
Humiliation is the word that comes up again and again.
Yeah. And that feeling, that sense of injury, it was just ripe for exploitation by anyone offering simple, radical answers, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And then pile on the economic catastrophe. It was staggering.
Staggering is the right word. Serious economic problems right away, leading to that period of hyperinflation, just wiped out middle-class savings.
Completely destabilizing. People talk about needing wheelbarrows of cash just for basic goods.
Exactly. It undermined everything. Daily life, financial security, trust in the government, all gone. Then, after a bit of a recovery, the Great Depression hits in '29.
And it all comes crashing down again. Crippling unemployment, factories closing, farms failing, millions losing everything.
Plunging society back into just profound desperation.
And what's truly, fascinating in a grim way is how Hitler and the Nazis just cynically, brilliantly leveraged this crisis.
Right. They didn't just point out the problems.
No, they positioned themselves as the only solution. Hitler, in those powerful, captivating speeches, constantly promised to make Germany great again, restore jobs, bring back prosperity, economic, cultural.
A seductive narrative for people desperate for answers.
Incredibly seductive. This widespread discontent, this desperate search for a way out, it became the perfect fertile ground for their scapegoating narrative to take root. They tapped right into that collective trauma, that humiliation.
Offering a clear enemy and a clear path to what? Redemption.
Precisely. Redemption, restoration. It was powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Which brings us to that crucial question, why? Why did the Nazis single out Jewish people specifically as the root cause of all Germany's problems?
It wasn't just random, was it?
Not at all. The answer is complex, and it's rooted in history far older than the Nazi Party itself. Anti-Semitism, unfortunately, was nothing new.
Right. It had been around for centuries.
Centuries. Its roots are deep and, frankly, pernicious. They evolved over time. Historically, you have this deeply entrenched religious animosity.
The idea that Jews were responsible for the death of Jesus.
Exactly. Based on certain interpretations of the Gospels, many Christians believe Jews were collectively responsible. Now, however historically inaccurate or distorted that belief is, it fostered centuries of antagonism, prejudice.
And this wasn't some fringe idea.
No, it was embedded in religious teachings, popular culture across Europe. Figures like Martin Luther, the German priest, founder of Protestantism. Our sources describe him as, quote, a passionate anti-Semite and a ferocious believer in absolute obedience to political authority.
So his writings played a role too.
Oh, definitely. His later writings, deeply hostile to Jews, certainly helped normalize and perpetuate anti-Jewish feeling in German society. It created a kind of historical precedent for religious intolerance against Jews.
And then there were the economic stereotypes.
Yes, very significant and enduring. In medieval Europe, Jews were often permitted to lend money and charge interest usury, which was frequently forbidden to Christians by religious doctrine.
So they filled an economic niche, but it backfired.
In a way, yes. While it served a vital function, it regrettably led to these popular damaging stereotypes. Jews as wealthy, grasping, exploitative, and that stereotype stuck, regardless of the actual economic reality for most Jewish people.
And they became easy scapegoats.
Terribly easy. Throughout the Middle Ages and beyond, whenever society faced a crisis, war losses, famines, even the Black Death, blaming a marginalized other was a convenient, awful solution.
So persecution was normalized. Ghettos, massacre.
Exactly. Because of this pervasive Christian anti-Semitism, Jews in many European states faced severe restrictions, forced to live in ghettos, victims of pogroms, systematic violent attacks. These historical precedents normalized the idea of Jews as an other, to be blamed, persecuted, isolated.
So we have this ancient religious and economic prejudice. How did it flare up again, get weaponized in the 20th century, especially in Germany's post-war crisis?
That's the critical link. In the 20th century, new political and economic dynamics basically poured fuel on these old embers. After World War I, you had new states created in Eastern Europe.
And Jewish people often faced harsh treatment there.
Yes, discrimination was often intense. So many emigrated, including to Germany, hoping for a better, more tranquil life.
And while many were poor, some did prosper.
Right. And that perceived prosperity, especially when the wider German population was suffering extreme economic hardship, sometimes caused intense jealousy and resentment. It fed into existing biases, even though most German Jews had been citizens for generations, deeply integrated.
The sources mention specific economic disparities that the Nazis then twisted.
They did. And it's tragic how these were weaponized.
Yeah.
Jewish people were statistically generally better educated and, in aggregate, typically prosperous. The average Jewish household income, for example, was reportedly 3 times that of the average non-Jewish family.
But that wasn't the whole picture, was it?
Not at all. And the sources acknowledge this. There was a significant stratum of poor Jews struggling just like everyone else. But nuance. That was completely lost in Nazi propaganda. They painted this uniform picture of Jewish wealth and control.
And there was this idea of professional overrepresentation.
Yes, particularly in cities. The sources note things like only 2% of German Jews worked in agriculture, but 25% of agricultural wholesalers were Jewish. Jews owned 2/3 of retail clothing outlets, including some very famous department stores, visible symbols of success.
And in professions like law and medicine.
Exactly. Their prominence there, especially during times of hardship for others, fueled what the sources call a latent anti-Semitism that had long been present in a large part of the German middle class. The view was widely held that there were too many Jewish lawyers or doctors.
Oh.
These specific anxieties, these resentments, a mix of some economic reality and a lot of distorted perception. That's what the Nazis exploited so effectively.
So if I'm understanding this right, we're seeing these really old, deep-seated prejudices, religious, economic crashing headlong into the very real, very acute economic pain and national humiliation of post-WWII Germany.
Yes.
It's not one single thing. It's like a perfect storm brewing where all these different elements fuse into one dangerous narrative.
That's a critical summary. Precisely. This pre-existing, often unspoken, latent anti-Semitism. It provided this deeply receptive audience for the Nazi Party's political appeal.
They didn't have to invent it from scratch.
No, they just amplified it. They identified Jewish people as the single group to blame for everything wrong with Germany, and they offered a concrete solution:
even though the Jewish population was relatively small.
Exactly. Roughly 525,000 self-identifying Jews, maybe 100,000 recent immigrants, a small minority. Easy to point fingers at, historically used to being scapegoated, and critically lacking the power to effectively resist. The ground was incredibly fertile for that hatred to just flourish.
Which brings us to Hitler himself. What's really unsettling here is that his anti-Semitism wasn't just political convenience, was it? Not just a tactic.
No, not at all. The sources are clear on this. These were his deeply held, real, fervent opinions, and views shared, unfortunately, by many Nazis at every level. For Hitler, it wasn't posturing, it was a core conviction, almost pathological.
You see signs of it early on in Vienna.
Yes, during his formative years, August Kubitschek, a friend from his 20s, recorded how Hitler's accumulated hatred of forces threatening Germans was mainly concentrated upon the Jews, who he saw as dominating Vienna.
He thought they were making it less Germanic.
He did. Believed they were depriving the city of its character, corrupting its culture. But what's even more complex, almost disturbing.
What's that?
Despite this deep hatred, Hitler actually had Jewish acquaintances. He even spent musical evenings in some Jewish homes.
So it wasn't based on complete ignorance or isolation.
No, it points to this twisted internal logic. He could compartmentalize, somehow justify his broader genocidal beliefs, even while having some personal interactions, and connecting this to the bigger picture. Hitler's personal, almost pathological hatred became the engine, the emotional, rhetorical engine for the party's anti-Semitism.
He wasn't just tapping into prejudice, he was cranking it up.
Exactly, amplifying it with his own fervent, deeply ingrained beliefs, turning it into the absolute central pillar of the Nazi worldview. His personal views are laid out so starkly in that chilling letter from 1919.
Way before he came to power.
Long before. He wrote, "Jewry is absolutely a race and not a religious association. Their dance around the golden calf is becoming a merciless struggle for all those possessions we prize most highly. In his effects and consequences, he is like a racial tuberculosis of the nations."
Racial tuberculosis, that's horrifying language.
It is, and profoundly important. It shows his core belief. Jews as a distinct, dangerous race, an existential threat, not just a religious group, that racialization was a critical step towards dehumanization and ultimately extermination.
And he had Goebbels amplifying this message.
Absolutely. His brilliant, ruthless propaganda chief, Joseph Goebbels. Together, they relentlessly presented Jews as enemy number one, the singular, all-encompassing scapegoat.
Blaming them for the WWII defeat? The stab-in-the-back myth?
Precisely. The idea Germany wasn't beaten on the battlefield, but undermined from within by Jews, communists. Hitler claimed Jews called for ending the war too soon, weakening German resolve.
And that they controlled the economy.
Yes, believed they had a stranglehold affecting the war effort, controlling post-war wealth, preventing ordinary Germans from prospering. This narrative was incredibly potent. It offered a single, easy-to-understand enemy for incredibly complex problems. A clear target for all that rage and frustration.
So it's religious hatred, economic grievances, national betrayal, all bundled together. And then, to make it seem credible, they wrapped it in this pseudoscientific justification, Nazi race theory.
That's precisely right. They didn't just promote vague anti-Semitism. They blended this idea of the all-powerful enemy with a, well, frankly, pseudoscientific and internally inconsistent race theory.
To give it a veneer of academic respectability.
Exactly. A seemingly reasoned justification for their systematic persecution. The designated racial theorist was Alfred Rosenberg, a central, if often contradictory, figure.
That was his background.
Architecture, surprisingly. But he got deeply interested in racial theory through writers like Arthur de Gobineau and Houston Stewart Chamberlain, proponents of this utterly fallacious idea of a Nordic super race.
The toxic wellspring for Nazi racial thought.
Pretty much. Rosenberg's first book, 1920, The Trek of the Jews Through the Ages, presented his rather inconsistent and indigestible ideas. Claimed Jews were behind both capitalism and Bolshevism.
Which makes no logical sense.
None. They're diametrically opposed. But it served a cynical purpose. Paint Jews as the enemy regardless of their actual politics or economics. Blame them for anything exploitation or revolution. He also claimed they were intent on destroying culture and morality.
It's just pure dehumanization.
Utterly. And Rosenberg was very much a conspiracy theorist. His ideas were often based on fake research presented by others. Deliberate untruths.
Like what?
Well, the false idea Jews benefited from the 1917 Russian Revolution. In reality, they were one of its greatest victims through vicious pogroms, anti-Jewish riots that killed tens of thousands.
So the exact opposite of his claim.
Completely. His ideas were built on inaccurate statistics, like how many Soviet commissars were Jewish, and pure misinformation, like the lie that U.S. foreign aid only went to Jews. He genuinely convinced himself and other Nazis of this international conspiracy to take over the world.
An elaborate fiction.
Baseless, but powerful. A comprehensive narrative for their followers.
So not based on facts at all. A carefully constructed fiction, but powerful because it tapped into existing biases, existing fears, offered that single explanation for a complex world. But how did this seemingly absurd theory gain so much traction, become central to state policy?
It gained traction precisely because it provided that pseudoscientific and inconsistent race theory. It gave them that seemingly reasoned and academic justification for the increasingly brutal treatment of Jews.
A convenient framework for what Hitler already wanted to do.
Exactly, especially given Germany's post-WWII struggles, public disillusionment. It offered a simplistic explanation for national failure, an external enemy, a radical path forward, incredibly appealing to a population desperate for answers and someone to blame.
And critical thinking was being suppressed.
Increasingly suppressed, information tightly controlled. These fabrications faced little challenge, allowing them to solidify into accepted truth. And this ideology wasn't just talk, it immediately took concrete shape in the Nazi Party's official program. The 1920 program, Clause 4. Chillingly clear.
What did it say?
None but members of the nation may be citizens of the state. None but those of German blood, whatever their creed, may be members of the nation. No Jew, therefore, may be a member of the nation.
Wow. Explicit exclusion right from the start.
Laying the groundwork for everything that followed. Stripping rights, discrimination, long before they had power, declaring their intent unambiguously.
And once that was in the program, the propaganda machine really ramped up, solidifying these ideas.
Oh, absolutely. Dissemination was central. By 1923, Rosenberg edits the Nazi newspaper Völkischer Beobachter, the People's Observer,
which was just filled with
packed with Nazi propaganda, stoking hatred of Jews, communists, anyone the Nazis didn't like. Rosenberg's continuing conspiracy tales fueled the vicious streak in National Socialist anti-Semitism. The public was constantly bombarded, normalizing the Jewish enemy, eroding any tolerance. Then Hitler's failed beer hall putsch in 1923. He uses his prison time to write Mein Kampf, My Struggle.
Influenced by Rosenberg visiting him.
Sources suggest heavily influenced. In Mein Kampf, Hitler weaves Rosenberg's ideas into this comprehensive theory, German Jews as enemies of the state, the main reason Germany wasn't fulfilling its potential.
And the solution was rule by pure-blooded Aryan Germans.
Exactly. That vague term, mostly meaning non-Jews, ideally Nordic types, seen as the racial pinnacle. The book became the chilling blueprint for their future, a detailed articulation of their warped worldview.
And Mein Kampf didn't just focus internally, did it? It laid out this global conspiracy justifying future wars.
That's a critical insight. Absolutely. Hitler expanded the conspiracy theory, Jews aiming for world domination. By equating Soviet communists and Western capitalists with Jews, he could claim both sides were part of a single Jewish conspiracy targeting Germany.
Which conveniently justified
that Germany must defend itself through aggressive expansion and rid itself of the enemies within. It turned internal prejudice into a rationale for external aggression, a coherent, though fabricated purpose for military buildup and conquest. Plus, Hitler desperately wanted a militaristic state, saw it as a way to cut unemployment, huge army, arms industry, gain resources through invasion, control the population, so he presents war as essential to Germany's survival.
And this tied into the race theory.
Seamlessly. The idea of the Herrenrasse, the master race, Aryan Germans needing continuous testing, strengthening through never-ending struggle with inferior races like Jews and Slavs.
Social Darwinism applied to human society.
A distorted version, yes.
Yeah.
Survival of the fittest, justifying ruthless competition between races. And for Hitler, the master race needed Lebensraum, living space.
Justifying expansion, especially eastward.
Exactly. Into Slavic lands, which inevitably meant more conflict with Slavs and Jews, deemed racially inferior. It was a terrifyingly comprehensive framework for both internal persecution and external conquest.
It sounds like a complete self-sustaining worldview, everything revolving around this fabricated Jewish problem, providing a twisted logic for everything from economics to war.
It was precisely that. Rosenberg hammered it home again in his second major work, Myth of the 20th Century in 1930.
Solidifying the race-based blueprint.
Yes, Jews as the #1 target for eradication. He blended pseudoscience, distorted anthropology, eugenics with distorted history, concocted a theory explicitly rejecting democratic and liberal values, saw them as Jewish-influenced, weak.
Replaced by
A dictatorial system. Supermen, the Germanic Aryans ruling over inferior races. Jews, black people, right at the bottom of his scale, justifying their subjugation, eventual destruction. It became a foundational text for Nazis, a seemingly intellectual justification for radical policies.
So not just theory, a meticulous blueprint for total control, total destruction. Crafting this enemy was absolutely central to their entire worldview, their plans for Germany, laying the groundwork for the unimaginable.
And the critical takeaway here: while this anti-Semitism definitely helped boost the Nazi Party's popularity in elections through the 1920s, tapping into that existing prejudice.
That wasn't the only reason they rose to power.
No, many other parties then were also anti-Semitic. It wasn't unique to the Nazis. As the scholar D. Cesarini notes, the Nazi Party did not come to power because of anti-Semitism alone. Other appeals were often more tangible.
Like promising jobs, restoring pride.
Exactly. Promises to fix the economy, restore German pride after the humiliation of WWII and Versailles. Those often resonated more immediately with voters. However, once Hitler becomes chancellor in January 1933 and systematically builds his dictatorship, then Nazi anti-Semitism truly moves to the absolute foreground of their politics.
No longer just a campaign tool, but state policy.
State policy. The race theory was immediately applied to justify practical actions, confiscating Jewish wealth, businesses, providing a cynical excuse for military conquest expansion. Cesarini puts it powerfully. Nazi policy was perpetually informed by the fantasy of the Jewish enemy.
So racial policy wasn't just about expressing hatred.
It was also a powerful tool to control everyone, Jews and non-Jews. Racial policy gave the state license to intrude into ever more private and personal realms.
Making it hard to speak out.
Very hard. Ideological conformity was enforced on the population, and dissent from ideological goals was violently penalized. Once they had power, the fabricated enemy became the foundation of state control, turning an internal delusion into a national imperative.
So once Hitler has his dictatorship in 1933, once this state-backed ideology takes hold, what did it actually mean for Jewish people living in Germany day to day? How did these solutions to the Jewish problem start to play out?
Well, once empowered by the state, the anti-Semitism really did come to the foreground, and the solutions began immediately, escalating with, frankly, terrifying speed and cruelty. The goal, right from the start, was chillingly simple.
Remove Jewish people from German territory.
By any means necessary. It wasn't a gradual slide. It was deliberate, systematic from day one. The early actions were about disruption, isolation, forcing Jews to move from smaller villages into larger towns and cities.
A kind of internal displacement.
Exactly. Isolating them from their communities, businesses, networks. At the same time, relentless Nazi propaganda print, radio, film, justifying the escalating terror, painting Jews as dangerous outsiders, a threat to German purity, prosperity.
And some non-Jews saw an opportunity in this.
Sadly, yes, a deeply cynical, perverse opportunity. Jewish wealth. Businesses were systematically appropriated, closed down. Some non-Jewish Germans saw a chance to grab those assets, customers. This complicity, born of greed or maybe fear, was a crucial factor.
It sounds like they also moved fast to crush any opposition.
Precisely. In the early years, there was some public voices of dissent, individuals, small groups speaking out, but tragically ineffective against the dictatorship.
Because the regime enforced conformity.
Ruthlessly. Ideological conformity was enforced. Dissent. Violently penalized. It wasn't just a threat. Speak out, even in private, if overheard, you could face the Gestapo.
The secret police.
Yes. Investigations could lead to beatings, prison and concentration camps, worse. Making terrifying examples, the totalitarian nature meant racial policy gave the state license to intrude into ever more private and personal realms, monitoring, controlling, punishing dissenters. It effectively stifled organized resistance to the anti-Jewish policies.
Which brings us to the Nuremberg Laws in 1935. That feels like a pivotal moment, moving hatred from propaganda into actual law. How did they define and isolate Jewish people?
They were a catastrophic turning point. In order to know who these measures were to be applied to, the Nuremberg Laws were passed. They precisely defined who exactly was a Jew from the Nazi point of view. Essentially, anyone with 3 or more Jewish grandparents, regardless of their religion or how they identified themselves.
Though hundreds of thousands who didn't see themselves as Jewish were suddenly targeted.
Exactly. Maybe they converted, had distant Jewish ancestry, or from mixed marriages. suddenly by law, stripped of their German identity, subjected to the same persecution. And this was rooted in that obsession with pure Aryan blood.
Yes, a central tenet of their race theory, enshrined in the Nuremberg laws. Explicit clauses prohibiting sexual relations, marriage between Jews and non-Jews.
Race defilement.
Carried severe criminal penalties. This legal move was designed specifically to help the Nazis create the image of the German Jew as different, alien, and dangerous, separating them legally, socially. It wasn't just segregation, it was systematic dehumanization, paving the way for worse. This is where the abstract, pseudo-scientific race theory becomes concrete. Legal discrimination, literally defining us and them, cementing the legal basis for persecution. Hatred becomes state policy, systematically dismantling lives.
Exactly. And those initial solutions, how to remove Jews from Germany, they just kept escalating. Encouraging emigration, forcing it through economic pressure, stripping citizenship rights, intimidation, beatings, destroying property like during Kristallnacht in 1938.
And eventually, ghettos.
Yes, rounding people up into these closed-off, overcrowded ghettos in cities. Horrific conditions designed for starvation, disease. The Nazis were relentless in making life unbearable, hoping to force them out. But despite all this suffering, Hitler remained frustrated, didn't he?
Yes. He found none of his solutions truly succeeded in emptying German territory of his #1 enemy fast enough or completely enough for him. The problem persisted, even as Jewish life became this agonizing daily struggle. Their very presence offended his vision of a pure Germany. And then the cruel paradox. Germany expands its borders, and Hitler ironically makes his Jewish problem much, much bigger.
A profoundly tragic point. As Germany expands from 1938, the Anschluss with Austria occupying Czechoslovakia, invading Poland in 1939 suddenly, he has millions more Jews under Nazi rule.
What started as an internal problem becomes pan-European.
Exactly. Encompassing Jewish communities across conquered territories. It dramatically increased the scale of the perceived Jewish problem. Emigration, local ghettos, they weren't enough for the millions now under Nazi control. It intensified his desire for a definitive, total answer, which led to the horrific culmination. Hitler settled on what he called the final solution.
A chillingly bureaucratic term.
For a secret plan. A systematic, industrialized program to kill millions of Jews and other perceived enemies through forced labor until death and in purpose-built extermination camps.
This was his answer to the Junrein, the Jewish question.
His genocidal answer. Complete cleansing of Jews from Europe. The methods were unspeakably brutal. Systematically rounding people up across Europe, sending them to concentration camps, which became death camps.
Like Auschwitz?
Like Auschwitz-Birkenau. Mass murder in gas chambers. Auschwitz was liberated January 27th, now Holocaust Remembrance Day. Others forced into slave labor, horrific conditions, worked to death from starvation, exhaustion, disease.
And the Einsatzgruppen.
Yes, the roaming SS killing squads. Mass murders, shooting Jews and others into pits, especially in the East. Genocide on an industrial scale. The systematic killing only stopped in spring 1945, when the Allies finally defeated Nazi Germany, liberating the camps. By the end of the war, around 6 million Jews had been murdered across Europe.
2/3 of Europe's Jewish population.
Gone. And while we must remember the many other victims, communists, Roma, Soviet POWs, homosexuals, disabled people, so many others, Jewish people were the largest single group, the primary absolute focus of Nazi hatred, targeted for total annihilation based solely on who they were, the bitter end. Hitler commits suicide in his Berlin bunker, April 1945. Unwilling to face the consequences.
Still blaming Jews in his final testament.
Madly blaming Jews for starting the war. Clinging to his fabricated enemy until the last breath. Germany collapses. Allies claim victory in Europe, May 1945. Some justice came with the Nuremberg trials, Rosenberg. Others found guilty of crimes against humanity and hanged. More trials followed for decades, but the scale of the horror, an indelible, agonizing scar. A permanent warning.
This horrific end. It's just such a stark testament. How historical prejudice, fueled by economic desperation, fused with his twisted ideology, can lead to unimaginable atrocities, especially when unchallenged, when the state itself wields it as a weapon against a perceived enemy. The systematic, industrialized nature of the Holocaust. It's a chilling reminder of unchecked hatred, the power of lies, and the critical need for constant vigilance against dehumanization. It shows that devastating line, doesn't it? From ideology straight to mass murder.
And it raises that fundamental question for all of us.
Yeah.
What happens when a state, under a totalitarian regime, gets that license to intrude into ever more private and personal realms, all under the guise of racial purity, national survival.
The Holocaust is the catastrophic answer.
The ultimate catastrophic answer. It shows that direct, horrifying line from abstract hatred, fabricated enemies, to systematic extermination. The destructive power of unchecked, state-sponsored ideology. The chilling effectiveness of propaganda when it successfully dehumanizes an entire people, making their destruction seem not just acceptable but necessary to too many.
So we've taken a deep dive today into this truly chilling confluence of factors behind the Holocaust. We've seen how those centuries of anti-Semitic beliefs combined with Germany's post-WWII despair created that fertile, desperate ground. We unpacked Hitler's personal, almost pathological hatred, the pseudoscientific race theory from people like Rosenberg used as the twisted justification. And finally, how those beliefs systematically escalated into horrific policies from the Nuremberg laws defining and stripping Jewish identity right through to the final solution, that industrial-scale mass murder.
And it's just crucial to remember, isn't it? Their core beliefs about Jews were rooted in fabrication. No real evidence. Just an opportunistic scapegoat for Germany's problems, a unifying enemy. The race theory itself, a thin, pseudoscientific gloss over a political strategy, control, conquest, genocide. This deep dive really shows the terrifying power of narrative, even when built entirely on lies, when it's wielded by a totalitarian regime silencing dissent, monopolizing information.
So as you, our listener, reflect on this incredibly dark history, maybe consider, what stands out to you about how easily, how readily a fabricated enemy can become the justification for just unspeakable acts? And what responsibility do we bear as individuals, as a society, to recognize and challenge those kinds of narratives, those underlying conspiracy theories in our own time? The echoes of history, they aren't always loud, but they are always there if we're willing to look and learn.